Dear friends, teure versammelte Freund, thank you all for joining us today. A hartlichen Dank für sein mit uns heint. I am honored to welcome you to our annual gathering here in Riverside Park, this year marking the 80th anniversary of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. We come together at a time when our gathering takes on greater significance with every passing year, as hatred and anti-Semitism increasingly poison the events of our everyday lives. We come together at this simple, unpretentious stone, der Stein, as we call it in Yiddish, to honor the extraordinary heroism of the fighters of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. Der Stein does not derive its poignancy from its grandeur, nor from the fact that it is a temporary marker embedded here in 1947 as a promise that a permanent tribute to the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising would later be built. Der Stein derives its meaning from us, because it represents unspeakable horror and magnificent heroism, because it possesses the silent scream of death and the determination to fight against all odds, so the fighters could say, "We will choose the moment of our death, not the Nazis." I'd like to take a moment to thank the Parks Department staff, our own David Goldstick and the Riverside Conservancy for taking such good care of our gathering place. We're also pleased to be joined today by City Council member Gail Brewer, who represents District 6, which includes the Warsaw Ghetto Memorial Plaza here in Riverside Park. Thank you for joining us. Also, a special thanks to Shane Baker for his tireless efforts in spearheading today's event, and to Fagela Jacobs and Moish Rosenfeld for helping to coordinate our annual commemoration. As this gathering is a memorial, we ask that there be no applause during our program. 80 years ago today, on the first night of Passover, the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising began. April 19th marked the beginning of an epic battle, not for victory, as the resistance fighters knew from the outset, but for the honor of our people. At 2 a.m., lookouts spotted the German artillery approaching the ghetto, and they entered the ghetto at 4 a.m. By 7 in the morning, their battalions were in position inside and outside the walls of the ghetto. The Nazis used the intersection at Mire and Zamenhof streets to stage their assault, intentionally while everyone slept. But the band of resistance fighters was waiting for them, hidden behind barricades at the four corners of the intersection. They suddenly opened fire with handmade Molotov cocktails and shots from their lone machine gun. Soon, the street was littered with the bodies of Nazis. This is how it began 80 years ago today. And when the battle ended, Marek Edelman, one of the leaders of the Jewish Fighting Organization, wrote, quote, "On May 10, 1943, this period of our bloody history, the history of the Warsaw Jews, came to an end. The site where the buildings of the ghetto once stood became a ragged heap of rubble, reaching 3 stories high. Those who were killed in action had done their duty to the end, to the last drop of blood that soaked into the pavements of the Warsaw Ghetto. We, who did not perish, leave it to you to keep their memory alive forever." Time and again, history shows us that the darkest moments can give rise to opportunities for greatness. During these challenging times, all of us must commit to the hard work of protecting democracy, liberty, and freedom. The work is not easy, and there's always a price to pay. But it's a price we have to pay, because the evil that drives fascism and autocracy is ultimately no match for the promise of liberty that illuminates the lives of free people everywhere. Nations, like individuals, face moments of truth, moments in history that are turning points, which challenge our survival and the survival of our core values. When we watch the news, the challenge may seem stifling and overwhelming. We continually ask, how can this be happening? How can people not have learned? Our collective decisions determine whether we emerge from these moments stronger and resilient, or if we disappear in silence. Do we have the moral courage, irrespective of personal consequences, to act on what in our hearts we know to be right? Under these circumstances, our gathering and our message are more important than ever. We make the decision to come together today as a community and continue to return year after year to this simple stone to remember and to remind the world so it never forgets. We come together to resist oppression, to resist fascism and hatred, to resist small-mindedness and intolerance, and to commemorate the fight for freedom. Although we are children and grandchildren of survivors, we can only manage to comprehend the tiniest fraction of the fear, the horror, the despair that the Holocaust embodied. When we think of how our parents stared into the face of death every day for years, it can be enough to crush you. Yes, we were born from suffering, but we were also born from heroism. Our parents and grandparents sang "Sag nicht keinmal, als du gehst den letzten Weg" as they face certain death. Never say this is the end of the road. And indeed, we are here because our work has not ended. Our journey does not end until every person knows the story and the lessons of the Holocaust. Our journey does not end because their fight is our fight. Our journey does not end because the hatred that sparked the Holocaust continues today in so many places. Our journey does not end until every life flourishes in freedom. Wir seien da, noch einmal und Tage noch einmal, again and again, do ve do, generation to generation. That is our legacy. May the invincible soul of those who fought, perished, and survived inspire us to be compassionate and to have the wisdom to find peace within and build peace between nations. The price of freedom is far less dear than the price of forsaking it. Long live their blessed memories. Kavod sei Dank. And now I'd like to ask our friend Shifee Losacco to come up and sing for us. Shifee has sung with choirs and is a featured soloist at Lincoln Center, Yiddish theater productions on Broadway, and is currently a soloist with the Peace of Heart Choir.
Wie schwer es ist zu leben, vorbei als ein Winter, wann du rett in Schmattes und Kält. Ein Strahl hat das schmolzende Mais von mein Fenster gebracht, ein Geruss von der Welt. A Welt hat sie bläht sich mit weißem Zwiet. Und Vögel haben gezwischert ein Lied. Nur bei uns ist grau und finster, senkt Rumet auf die Welt, warf die Sonne uns karge Strahlen, kleiben mir sie mit die Hand. Warnt uns die Spitzfinger an, trugen ihre Heim strahlach Lachsun. Und es wird uns etwas geringer, es will sich singen, springen frei. A Winterle hat sich vergangen, wird durch Spares, als soll dein geräumt mir dabei. Es hat sich eint hinter dem Hilzen im Park an, zu wachsen der Rosinker Mai. Und im Winterle sagt, als die Gräser lach grün, sie schicken mir Grüßen und rufen ein. Nur bei uns ist grau und finster, es hängt der Rummet auf die Wand, wirft die Sonne uns karge Strand, kleiben mir sie mit die Hand. Warnt uns die Spitzfinger nach oben, tragen wir heim, strahlach lach so. Und es wird uns etwas geringer, es will sich singen, springen frei. Weg ist der Tate in Stadt auf der Arbeit, muss so weit nebach gehen. Wird mir heimbringen a frischen Tsvaygl, mit blätterlach grünen geschehen. Nu wird es in reinigen Wasser stehen, und es wird sich von Tsvaygl zippeln abholen. Nur bei uns ist grau und finster, es hängt der Rummet auf die Wand, wirft die Sonne uns karge Strand, kleiben wir sie mit die Hand. Warnt uns die Spitzfinger nach oben, tragen wir daheim, strahlach lach so. Und es wird uns etwas geringer, es will sich singen, springen frei.
We appreciate the beauty, but please, no applause. And now we're proud to have Jeffrey Shandler deliver his keynote address. Jeff is Distinguished Professor of Jewish Studies at Rutgers University and has published extensively on the Holocaust, pre-war Jewish life in Eastern Europe, as well as Yiddish after World War II. His most recent publication is Yiddish, Biography of a Language. Jeff?
We are gathered today before a square of stone set into the ground. This stone, which is, as you heard, often referred to simply in Yiddish as der Stein, is inscribed with these words. This is the site for the American memorial to the heroes of the Warsaw Ghetto Battle, April through May, 1943, and to the 6 million Jews of Europe martyred in the cause of human liberty. On October 19th, 1947, 15,000 people gathered here for the dedication of this planned memorial. In the ensuing years, several ideas for a monument to be erected here were proposed, and for one reason or another, none of them came to fruition. Instead of designating where the monument would be placed, it might seem that the Stein itself has become the monument. However, echoing the opening remarks of Marcel Kshensky, I would argue that we are the monument. It is made up of the individuals who have gathered here now and every year on April 19th to mark the anniversary of the start of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. And that makes this a very unusual and very special kind of monument, not one sculpted in marble or bronze, but made up of people. And therefore, in a distinctive and perhaps surprising way, it is a more enduring memorial. Monuments of stone or metal are typically put up with great fanfare, but before long, they become sites not of remembrance, but of forgetting. They blend into the landscape, and people ignore them as they walk by. But this monument is recreated every year by the individuals who assemble here to recall the heroism of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising and of all Jews who resisted the Nazi-led genocide by whatever means was available to them, as well as to mourn the millions of those whom the Nazis and their collaborators murdered, martyred in the cause of human liberty. It is perhaps also surprising that what makes this an enduring monument is the fact that it is a dynamic memorial. Because people have been gathering here for this act of remembrance over 3/4 of a century, the individuals who make up this monument's annual appearance have changed over time. There are those who came here when this stone was set in the ground who are no longer alive. There are those who have come here who had not yet been born in 1947 or even before the dawn of the 21st century. There are people who have become part of this living monument who are not Holocaust survivors or their descendants or who are not Jews, but they come here because the value, the commitments that this monument embodies. They come here to affirm the ideals of the people who initiated this annual memorial rite, inspired by the convictions of the Jewish Labor Bund. They're inspired by the commitment to Doekheit, literally here-ness in Yiddish, a belief that Jews should have the right to live as Jews and as the equals of their fellow citizens in every country, in whatever place they call here. They are inspired by the Bundist commitment to the Yiddish culture that sustained the survivors who installed the Stein as a continuing source of strength and creativity, and thereby refusing to let the enemies of this culture have the last word. And they are inspired by the Bund's commitment as a socialist movement to work for the rights and dignity of all people, to speak out and act in the continuing struggle against oppression, authoritarianism, and imperialism wherever and whenever it arises. As this is a memorial made up of people, the remembrance that it calls for does not take place only one day in April, because the ideals that this memorial represents inform our lives throughout the year. There may be no more fitting tribute to those ideals, as envisioned by the Jews who first gathered here 76 years ago, than this living monument, which remakes itself anew each spring. And there may be no better response to genocide than a monument made of people, affirming the value of human life. I hope to see you here next year and to be joined by new participants in this remarkable memorial, as the call to remember the heroes of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising and the Jews of Europe martyred in the cause of human liberty continues and continues to inspire us. Thank you.
Thank you. And now I'd like to ask Chaver Elye Palevsky to come up. Elye is the son of Shimon and Chayela Palevsky, partisans in the Vilna Velder, and lifelong Bund activists. Elye has taught Yiddish language and literature at Queen's College, Vilnius University, and Sholem Aleichem and Arbeitering Schulen.
schweigt. A few words before we read Sutzkever's Die Lererin Mire. As a child of partisans, when people would say to me as a kid, how come they didn't fight back? I would proudly say, but they did fight back. There were the partisans in the woods, there were revolts in the ghettos, there was the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. Only later, when I was 12, 13, did I begin to understand that the fighting back was not just physical, that the fighting back was spiritual, an assertion of common humanity, a showering of love and care and concern for each other, not just demonstrated by heroes like Mire Bernstein or Janusz Korczak, who accompanied his children to their transport to their final end, but everyday simple people who in their lives demonstrated the heroism and commitment to Menschlichkeit in the face of the greatest Unmenschlichkeit and maybe the greatest sin of the world, and that is indifference, Gleichgültigkeit. The poet Avram Sutzkever, Farnchoben, a Stern in Jung Vilna. Before the Choben, the destruction, he was a star of the young poets group Jung Vilna. Under the Nazis' noses, he was a book smuggler rescuing the treasures of YIVO, which are part of the Vilna collection now in YIVO at the Center for Jewish History. He was a partisan. He wrote in the woods and he fought with the partisans. He was a witness at Nuremberg. He became the editor of Die Goldene Kate, the anchor of Yiddish literary life in Israel when there was open hostility to that culture. And he was a Mishpache Freund, a family friend, because Tate Mame and Abrasche were in die Wälder von Naroch together. Mire Bernstein, Mire, a beloved teacher in Vilna, for a time even the director of the Real Gymnasie, an anti-Semit, the legendary Real Gymnasie, who is an extraordinary figure that Sutzkever captures. I will read to you from his memoir a few paragraphs, and then we'll read the poem in Yiddish. In Justin Cammy's translation, he writes, this is Sutzkever writing, in October 1941, Mire invited me to a performance at the school in Kavrin's Klois, and the Klois was unrecognizable. The Holy Ark was covered with greenery, flowers had been placed on windowsills, quotations from Yiddish writers hung from the walls. The children, no more than 40 remaining of the original 130, sparkled in their festive clothing. Red flowers decorated their chests. In the middle of the performance, there was a racket outside. The performance continued. But when a gunshot broke the window, Mire went out to see what was happening. Yidden-himen, Jew snatchers, were running through the alleys and courtyards in search of Jews. People were being grabbed and transported to a truck idling by the ghetto gates. Mire returned. She mounted the stage and announced, Kinderlech, children, those who want to annihilate us are in the ghetto. Do not scream, do not run, Remain calm, nobody panic, and slide yourselves under the stage, youngest first and according to age. Mire watched by the door all night. If the Yiddish entered the clois, she would sacrifice herself. They would think there was nobody else there and satisfy themselves with a single victim. Nennt er es Ärger? Nennt er es besser? Die Lererin Mire. Mit Lattes auf Leiber, zerschnitten in Passen, betreibt uns im Ghetto. Es gehen die Gassen. Die Heiser begleiten auf ewig gesegnet und steinerdig wird jeder Gesehre begegnet. In Tfilen wie Kräunen marschieren die Skenem. A Kälbele geht mit a Dorfsiden einem, a Freu schleppt a Geusses verklemmt in die Nägel. A Zweiter a Bindele Holz auf a Wägel. Und zwischen sie alle die Lererin Mire. A Kind auf ihr Arm, a gildene Lire. A Kind auf ihr Arm, beim Händel a Zweiten, a rum die Talmidim begleiten. Und kommt man zu jüdischer Gas, ist a teuer. Noch warm das Holz, wie a Kerber a Reuer. Und gleich wie a Schluss vergetriebene Stromen. Tut sich an Effen, verschlingt in die Trommen. Me jockt die Bechurvis ungeheut und on Feier. Das Bräut ist ein Buch und das Licht ist ein Bleier. Versammelt die Kinder in Chore Verdiere, es lernen sie weiter, die Lererin Mire. Sie lehnen sie Shalom Aleichem sa Meise. Es finkeln die Kinder und lachen bis Meise. Sie flecht sie mit bläuigen Gestänges die Zepplech und zählt ihr Vermögen 130 die Keplech. Zugleich mit der Sohn ist die Lererin Mire schon wach. Und sie wart auf die Kinderlach ihre. Sie kommen. Sie zählt. Oh, nicht zählen sie besser. Durch Nacht hat dort 20 verschnitten am Messer. Ihr Haut wird a Scheub in vernachtige Flecken. Noch sie tor sehen nicht Mire die Kinder an Plecken, verbeißt sie all Lieb und mit Gewurre, Beneiter, erzählt sie von Leckerten und munter sie weiter. Durch Nacht hat Graukeit bei Zeugen die Häfen und grau wird der Lehrerins Haar auf die Schläfen. Sie sucht in dem Keller ihr Mammen, der Blinder. Zusammen mit ihr fällen 17 Kinder. Wenn Sohn hat die Bluten getrickend, hat Mire behangen mit Grins die verjossemte Tiere. Die kommen der Lehrer Gerstein. Wir werden singen, der Chor soll über die teuren klingen. Schon klingt es, nicht weit ist der Frühling. Noch unten die Hecken, Bagnetten zerträchseln die Grunden. Mich schleppt vor die Chor von die Kellers und Löcher. Nicht weit ist der Frühling, verklingt aber Hecher. Schon 60 verblieben. Und Schwester und Namen. Die Lererin Mire ist alle zusammen. Es ist nur unser Yugnt-himen, ist treiberlich, Kinder. Eine Vorstellung darf man beweisen, geschwinder. Zum Yugnt-himen, nicht mehr wie 40. Nur etlich mit weißigen Hemdl, mit lichtigen Trittlich. Die Biene ist frisch, mit der Sonne, mit der Garten. Wir können auch in Teichel sich ausbeuten dorten. Beim Lenin, Peretzes dritte Matone, hat untergesägt das Gebäude dieser Konne. Sie haben gehabt. Und der Tag ist geblieben von 100 mit 30. Bloß Mire und 7. Also, bis die Hack hat zerspolten dem Sinnen, ist Mire a Blum und die kinderlich Bienen. Schon groß ist die Blum und verwelkt ihre Glieder. Nur morgen in Toi wird sie aufblühen wieder. Mire Bernstein ist umgebracht geworden in Majdanek.
And now we ask Menachem Fox to come up to sing a song for us. Menachem is a singer-songwriter, actor, and author who recently published his memoir, Becoming Ordinary, A Youth Born of the Holocaust, What I Kept, What I Let Go.
This is a song by Kshensky, who was a partisan of Vilna, along with Avram Sutzkever and Elye's parents. It's called Yiddish Partisan. It says, from the ghettos, instead of chains, we carry guns. The word revenge has deep meaning when it's written in blood. And that's why we fight back. Von die Ghettos Twisserwend in die Welt der Freie, anstatt Keten auf die Hand, halt a Bixer nahe. Der Faschist, der zittert hört, weiß nicht wovon Wahnen stürmen wie von unteren Jiden Partisanen. Der Faschist, der zittert hört, weiß nicht wovon Wahnen stürmen wie von unteren Jiden Partisanen. Wenig seinen Meeren Zoll, reißt wie Millionen, reißen mehr auf Bagentoll, riechen Echalonen. Der Faschist, der zittert hört, weiß nicht wovon Wahnen stürmen wie von unteren jeden Partisanen. Es wird ne komme, hat da Sinn, wenn mit Blut verschreibt man, war dem Heiligen Beginn. Rasen mir die Schreiten, der Faschist, der zittert hört, weiß nicht wovon Wahnen stürmen wie von unteren jeden Partisanen. Der Faschist, der zittert hört, weiß nicht wovon Wahnen stürmen wie von unteren jeden Partisanen. Keinmal wollen mir nicht sein, letzter Mohikaner. Bringt in Nacht die Sonnenschein zu dem jedem Partisanen. Der Faschist, der zittert hört, weiß nicht wovon Wahnen stürmen wie von Unterred, jeden Partisanen. Der Faschist, der zittert hört, weiß nicht wovon Wahnen stürmen wie von Unterred, jeden Partisanen.
And now I'd like to ask Irena Klepfisz to come up. Irena is a renowned poet, activist, and Yiddish translator whose activism is rooted in the feminist, lesbian, and Jewish communities. For 22 years, she taught Jewish women's studies at Barnard College. Her Bundist father, Michal, died in the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. Her most recent book of poems is her birth and later years, New and Collected Poems, 1971 to 2021. You okay? That's a great idea.
Is that going to screw up the mic?
No, it's perfect. Go ahead, try it. Whoops.
Okay. All over the world, Jews and allies are gathering today to commemorate the 80th anniversary of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. And we in New York are also meeting at our traditional gathering place here at Der Stein. Many of us have been coming to Der Stein for decades to pay tribute to the brave and heroic fighters of the battle that began on April 19th, 1943 on Pesach. At our gatherings, we have heard from historians and scholars, and we're privileged to hear also from survivors of ghettos, camps, and partisan organizations who bore witness to Jewish suffering and to Jewish resistance in its various forms. Ellenbogen, Mlotek, Jacobs, Rosenfeld, Rack, Spiegel, Palevsky, Kristall, Frisdorf, Mead, Cooperstein, Kahan, Ehrlich, Novogrodsky, Svedosh, Kirchenzweig, Schäffner, Dunkel. This is just a short list of the names of survivors with whom our lives have been intertwined. Many of them provided personal accounts of their experiences during the war, and we listen to them here at Der Stein every April 19th. For decades, our gatherings were primarily comprised of survivors, many of whom had been activist members of the Jewish Labor Bund, the organization which had formed the political and social context of their lives before the war. Most of these survivors are no longer with us, and what was personal has been transformed into historical text. Still, their descendants and their families have continued the tradition of our commemoration at Der Stein and have brought with them contemporary friends and allies, Jews and non-Jews. Like the survivors, we all share a broad understanding of the importance of resisting fascism and racism and of honoring those who fought against them. I believe that today, on this 80th anniversary, we recognize it is even more critical than ever to be meeting together and to be on our guard. And I believe that remembering the uprising and its aftermath can help us to deal with the difficult challenges facing us. It is commonplace to say that the fighters, once they learned of the German aim of liquidation, planned the uprising because they were determined to die on their own terms. But I think the fighters were also motivated by a belief that they still had power to preserve Jewish lives and to ensure a Jewish future. Certainly, they must have thought about their friends and family members in hiding on the Aryan side. Surely, they must have believed that their struggle inside the ghetto, though doomed, could at least momentarily slow down the German war machine, or maybe serve as a temporary distraction, thereby giving those still alive on the other side of the ghetto walls
a chance to live one more day, give them one extra day, so that perhaps at some point in the future they could resume living an ordinary life. At that time, surviving each day represented a major victory. So today I want to focus on what happened after the uprising, because though they witnessed the total destruction of Jewish life in Warsaw, those Jews still alive and passing continued to resist and to look towards a future. By April 19, 1943, the ghetto population had been reduced from over 400,000 to fewer than 60,000, reduced by starvation, disease, daily murders, and transports to Treblinka. Though poorly equipped, the Jews fought fiercely. Finally, on May 8th, the Germans surrounded the headquarters of the ZOB, Jewish Fighters Organization, at Mile 18. Some fighters were gassed, some shot, some committed suicide, including Commander Mordechai Anilevich. The ghetto and all its inhabitants was gone. And yet, the resistance was not over. Survivors, and there were some who escaped through the sewers, became partisans or disappeared into the Polish population in Warsaw and the surrounding countryside. Władka Mead, who had worked as a Bundescourier for the GOB and had moved in and out of the ghetto, recorded how life continued after the uprising. In her memoir, On Both Sides of the Wall, she described a gathering about 5 months after the ghetto uprising. Quote, "In the autumn of 1943, a small group of us, members of the Bund and Zukunft, gathered for a symbolic celebration of the anniversary of the founding of the Bund. At a time when all that had been our lives had been destroyed, this small gathering was no more than a remembrance of yesterday, of the pulsating Jewish labor movement in which we, its survivors, had been raised. And although the movement and the life belonged to the past, it comforted us a little to recall it now. There were 9 of us there at that meeting: Tzelek Tselemensky, Benjamin Mead, Chaim Ellenbogen, Zygmunt Igla, Inka Schweiger, and Bronke Feinmesser. We sat around a table decorated with flowers at Miodovat 24, one night with curtains drawn. For some time, we faced each other without being able to speak, and it was only after Tzelek spoke of the reason for our gathering that our spirits rose a bit. Little by little, almost in whispers, we recalled when such celebrations had been held in vast halls before huge audiences of workers with appropriate songs, music, speeches, and fluttering flags. Now all that remained was pain and the bitter realization of a world that accepted the inhumanity in which we lived." End of quote. What I find remarkable about this gathering to mark the 46th anniversary of the founding of the Bund is these hidden Jews' refusal to cut themselves off from the past, their insistence on remembering their historical Bundist roots. Surrounded by deadening indifference, these survivors forced themselves to remember and to hold on to the ideals and passions of their earlier life. But just remembering was not enough. In his memoir, The Stars Bear Witness, Bundist activist Bernhard Goldstein provided more details about these Bundists' awareness that the underground needed to continue fighting for their survival and their future. Quote, "After the ghetto had been destroyed, we faced one urgent task: organizing help for those who were left on the Aryan side, providing them with apartments, hiding places, documents, and food. Around Warsaw, hiding in the woods and in the open countryside, were possibly 20,000 uprooted, homeless wanderers. We estimated that the Bund alone was helping about 3,000 of them. Until the outbreak of the Polish uprising, the organized help of all Jewish groups and organizations had reached about 8,000 or 9,000. End of quote. Clearly, there was work to be done, and so towards the end of 1943, Bernard reported that they were able to set up headquarters in a 6-room apartment where they kept all their documents. Bernard also described the impact on the morale by any contact with the outside world, especially with American Jews. Quote, "I remember the great joy in July 1944 when the Polish government forwarded to us a microfilm which contained articles from Unser Zeit, the New York Bund magazine. Our joy was boundless. The microfilm was a direct, almost personal greeting from our comrades in America. We felt bound to them across the years of blood and suffering which divided us. Using a photographic enlarger, we transcribed all the documents, duplicated them on our machine, and distributed them among the comrades in hiding places. This contact with America did much to raise our morale. It reminded us that we had friends. It gave us the feeling that if this wonderful miracle of communication could be accomplished, all was not yet lost." End of quote. That phrase, "all was not yet lost," embodied the hidden Jews' belief in the possibility of a future. At the same time that the Polish underground was readying itself for the Polish uprising in August of 1944, the Jewish underground not only provided support for that effort, but also continued engaging with Jews hiding in Warsaw and in the nearby forests. Bernard wrote, quote, "Among the comrades whom we had brought to Warsaw from the forests shortly before the Polish uprising was Hanna Krystal and Jan Bilek. Hanna's husband, Gabrish Frischdorf, had been one of the heroes of the last ghetto battle. He had been killed in a gun battle in the Vyshkov forest a few months before the Polish uprising. Hanna was a slight 22-year-old girl. She was at this time in her 9th month of pregnancy." End of quote. Bernard then described how shortly after he brought her to Warsaw, Hanna, a survivor of the ghetto uprising, was caught by the Germans. 9 months pregnant, she still managed to escape, but then went into labor. Bernard eventually found Hanna a hiding place with other Jews, a cellar where, in earshot of the fighting outside, she gave birth to a baby boy, Gabrish, named after his father. In a story that was legendary among those I grew up with, Bernard confessed that a week after Gabrish's birth, he began to fear the baby might give away the presence of the group and endanger Hanna herself. "I looked down at the shriveled little bundle in my hands. Surely it was condemned to death anyhow. While it lived, it was a burden which might drag its mother to her death. A little pressure from my fingers and all would be over. Before me, I seemed to see Gabrish Frischdorf, a hero of the ghetto, rotting in an unknown grave in the forest. All that was left of him was this little flicker of life. My fingers felt stiff. I laid the baby gently back on its little bed of rags." The Bund's commitment to guarding what Bernard called the little flicker of life, the future that the children of comrades represented, is another remarkable aspect of these historical moments. I personally know of 5 child survivors who owed their lives to the devotion and determination not only of their parents, but also of their parents' comrades. The baby Gabrish Frischdorf, the twins Nelly and Vlotka Blit, Aljuna Friedrich, and myself. Bernard Goldstein, Vlotka Mead, Marek Edelman, Helena Scheffner, Bolek Ellenbogen, his sister Halinka Ellenbogen, Michal Klepfisz, my father, all were instrumental at one point or another in keeping the 5 of us alive, And these are only the children that I can name, because I know there were others. For example, Halinka got a job and watched over me in a Catholic orphanage where I'd been hidden by my parents. Marek, Halinka, and Vlatka moved Elzhuna multiple times whenever her hiding place became unsafe. Marek and my father Michał smuggled Nelly and Vlatka out of the ghetto, and then later, Vlatka relocated them when people became suspicious. Bernard made sure that Hannah delivered her baby in safe hiding. And after the Polish uprising, Bolek brought my mother and me food somewhere outside of Warsaw after Helena Scheffner had found us isolated, ill, and starving. And finally, at the end of the war, Marek paid off Poles who refused to release Elzhuna. He insisted on claiming her, though both her parents were dead. Elzhuna, all of us, were seen as part of the future. Let us remember that these rescuers took on the responsibility of ensuring our safety while their own lives were constantly in danger. Let us all remember that children were probably some of the most difficult and potentially dangerous to hide. Children are hard to control. They might cry or suddenly laugh or become angry or frightened because they didn't understand what was happening around them. Let us remember that Vlatka, Halinka, Marek, Bolek were barely in their 20s when they risked their lives to save us. And most important, let us remember that there was no blood connection between these incredibly brave, committed souls and the 5 children I have named and all those others whom they helped. Still, there was a bond between them and us, a bond rooted in their life with their comrades, a bond rooted in their memories and principles of the Jewish Labor Bund. They were determined that we children should always know who we are and know of our parents' Jewish life before the war. We were the ones to whom they envisioned they would pass on their legacy. We were and are their future. There is a document from that time that made an enormous impression on me each time I heard it read as a child at April 19th memorials. It is a document which not only affirms our responsibility to other Jews, but also points to the responsibility of all people to one another. It insists that human beings can do better, will do better. It insists that we are obligated not only to remember the past, but also to remember and take responsibility for shaping the future. Far from the Warsaw Ghetto, in London in 1942 and in the early months of 1943, Arthur Shmuel Ziegelbaum, the Bund representative to the Polish government in exile, tried with no success to mobilize help for the Jewish resistance and the coming Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. After he learned about the fierce battles and then about the ghetto's liquidations, Arthur Ziegelbaum committed suicide in protest on May 12, 1943, and left behind a letter addressed to the Polish leaders. Though painfully aware of the silent indifference of the Poles and the world, Ziegelbaum still looked toward the future and envisioned the possibility of a different world. Let me read a portion from that remarkable letter. I cannot continue to live and to be silent while the remnants of Polish Jewry, whose representatives I am, are being murdered. My comrades in the Warsaw Ghetto fell with arms in their hands in the last heroic battle. I was not permitted to fall like them together with them, but I belong with them to their mass grave. My life belongs to the Jewish people of Poland, and therefore I hand it over to them now. I yearn that the remnant that has remained of the millions of Polish Jews may live to see liberation together with the Polish masses, and that it shall be permitted to breathe freely in Poland and in a world of freedom and socialistic justice, in compensation for the inhuman suffering and torture inflicted on them. And I believe that such a Poland will arise and such a world will come about. I take leave of you with greetings and from everybody and from everything that was dear to me and that I loved. End of quote. It's more common, perhaps easier to remember unspeakable circumstances than to think about the energy, determination, and mundane gestures needed for daily survival. History can overwhelm us with its horrors. But a closer examination of the daily heroism of those who kept on believing and fighting for our future should inspire us today as we face the very real threats of fascism in this country and around the world. Today, on this 80th anniversary, let us remember and pay tribute to all those who resisted before, during, and after the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. Honor to their memory. Kavod zer andenk.
And now I ask Shane Baker to come up to share greetings that we've received from other gatherings. Shane serves as director of the Congress for Jewish Culture, der Jiddische Kulturkongress.
As Irka mentioned, we're joined around the world by people who commemorate this day. We have this greeting from the Melbourner Bund. Der Melbourner Bund, der Mond und anerkannte Ghettokämpfer, Partisaner und Frontkämpfer, was haben mit Mut und Heldigkeit, sage ich, genommen das Leben in der Hand, kadei sich wiederzustellen gegen den Nazi-Ratschim. 80 Jahre seien vorbei, sind im Aufstand im Warschauer Ghetto. Ihr das Bewundern seiner Tat nicht verkleinert geworden in unsere Augen, nur wir stehen noch mehr besteuert, wenn wir vertrachten sich, in wie hoffnungslos gewesen sein Rat und wie wichtig gewesen sein Ziel. Wir dämonen mit tiefen Treuer die ermordete 6 Millionen, hereingerechnet, höher wie Millionen Kinder, wo seien umgekommen in unbeschreibliche Bedingungen durch Hunger, Krieg, Keulen und Gaskammern. Wir anerkennen mit Besteuerung die schwere Pleite, was haben übergelebt im Milchome und haben aufs Nahe aufgebaut jüdische Gehilles, Institutions und ein Leben kadei zu versichern, dem Kiem von unser Volk noch einen dritten Hurben. Zusammen mit euch merken wir ab die dosige Daten, kadei jeder von den 6 Millionen und die Welt von wannen sie haben gestammt, soll keinmal nicht vergessen werden. Was weiter die Geschehnisse fallen herein in der Geschichte, als wichtiger ist es, aber wir sollen nicht vergessen. Kavod zer andenk, bundische Organisation Melbourne. From Zygmunt Stempinski, director of POLIN, the Museum of the History of Polish Jews, on behalf of the POLIN Museum, my gratitude to those who remembered together with us the 80th anniversary of the largest Jewish uprising in Nazi-occupied Europe. The tragic history of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising may serve as a point of departure to talk about the challenges of today's world, including the ongoing war in Ukraine. 80 years ago today, a small group of heroic young Jews took a stand against the criminal occupying force. Their act of defiance echoes down to us today and reminds us not to be indifferent. POLIN Museum has organized an all-year program of events focusing on the fate of the Jewish civilians during the uprising. We want to recall the memory not only of the fighters, but also of those whose resistance might have gone unnoticed. During the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, civilians hid in bunkers and shelters, defying the German system of deportations and mass murder. Instead of responding to summons to turn up for the transports heading towards imminent death, they remained in hiding. Their silent act of resistance was as important as armed combat. That is why we take a moment to pay tribute to those who resisted the Nazi perpetrators in every fashion. We shall remain committed to keeping their memory alive for future generations. From Open Republic, Association Against Anti-Semitism and Xenophobia, Warsaw, April 19th, 2023. In keeping with the legacy of Marek Edelman, we always gather on April 19th at noon because we remember. We remember what happened. We remember those who fought. We remember those who died. We remember those who kept this memory alive. We remember, and in the face of the bloody war in neighboring Ukraine, we send you Marek Edelman's message. Talking about the ghetto uprising has only one meaning: reminding the world that one cannot be an indifferent witness with impunity, or he will be spiritually maimed. Therefore, for our own good, we must not look at today's crimes in silence as the Holocaust was looked at years ago. There must be a movement that will force the governments of democratic, well-fed Europe to oppose genocide and help victims. Lastly, from the Yiddish Kulturverband, received today this greeting from Marcel Horestein, President, and Mire Wisakowski, Secretaria General, Federación de Entidades Culturales Judías de la Argentina. We welcome the events that take place these days to commemorate the heroic uprising of the Warsaw Ghetto. As in 1943, we see an urgent and imperative mandate to unite in the face of adversity to confront this new wave of anti-Semitism and discrimination throughout the world, the result of individualist aspirations and advances of fascism. In Argentina, we will hold an international event with partner institutions from Brazil, Chile, Canada, France, and Uruguay that will be broadcast by our networks and by the YouTube platform at 80 Ghetto Varsovia at 5:30 New York time. We invite you to view this broadcast and appreciate your support. We know that we share with you the work and the desire to build a society based on respect for human rights, in defense of life, and on the care and appreciation of our culture. For you and our freedom, wir seien da. We received also a greeting from the Swedish Yiddish Association. The Stockholm Yiddish Choir sang Leib Rosenthal's words composed in the Vilna Ghetto to a melody by Henoch Kohn, Mir leben ewig. The song was popularized by his sister, Chayela Rosenthal, who performed it in the Vilna Ghetto Theater. Chayela survived, Leib did not, but his words will indeed live forever.
Wir leben ewig, es brennt der Welt. Wir leben ewig, unser Groschengeld. Und euch so bieten es die alle Sonnen, was willen uns verschwarzen, unser Pony. Wir leben ewig, wir seien da. Wir leben ewig, in jeder Show. Wir werden leben und erleben schlechte Zeiten, überleben. Wir leben ewig, wir seien da. Wir leben ewig, es brennt der Welt. Wir leben ewig, ohne Groschengeld. Und neu zu pieken es die alle Sonnen, was willen uns verschwarzen, unser Pony. Wir leben ewig, wir seien da. Wir leben ewig, in jeder Show.
And now I invite Joanne Borts to come up and sing. Joanne is a New York-based Broadway actor and singer who appeared in the Yiddish Fiddler on the Roof and in many Broadway productions.
Unser Lied ist voll mit Treuer, der Geist ist unser Muntergang. Hotsch der Säune wacht beim Teuer, stürmt Jugend mit Gesang. Weil jung ist jeder, wer es will, nur Jugend haben kein Partei. Alte kennen euch sein Kinder von einer neuen freie Zeit. Wer es wogelt auf Wegen, wer mit Dreiskeit stellt sein Fuß, bringt die Jugend sie entgegen von dem Ghetto a Geruss. Weil jung ist jeder, wer es will, nur Jugend haben kein Partei. Alte kennen euch sein Kinder von einer neuen freie Zeit. Wir gedenken alles Sonnen, mir der Monnen alle Freund. Ewig wollen wir verbinden unser Nächten mitten heint. Weil jung ist jeder, wer es will, nur Jugend haben kein Partei. Alte kennen euch sein Kinder von einer neuen freie Zeit. Weil jung ist jeder, wer es will, nur Jugend haben kein Partei. Alte kennen euch sein Kinder von einer neuen freie Zeit.
And now I welcome Mindy Spiegel to come and give her keynote. Mindy spent her professional career as a teacher in Montreal, where she was born and raised. She is the daughter of Heike Belchaktowska and Baruch Spiegel, who were both members of the Jewish Fighting Organization in the Warsaw Ghetto.
Wichtig ist zu gedenken dem Aufstand. Wichtig ist auch zu gedenken der Yiddish, was haben heldisch gekämpft. Gekämpft haben sie ohne militärische Ausschulung und mit sehr wenig Gewehr gegen der stärkste bewaffnete Armee. It is important to remember the event. It is equally important to remember the individuals who fought bravely in the uprising. I will tell you about two brave individuals whose lives were permanently marked by their wartime experiences. My parents, Heike Belchatovska and Boer Spiegel. Heike ist gewesen ein 91 Kind und wie an 6 Jahren ist sie geblieben allein mit der Mama Mindel Hauptmann. Mindel ist gewesen ein Einbinder ein Coverfach für eine Frau in jener Zeit. Sie ist gewesen ein Bundist und ist gewesen aktiv in YIVO, jüdische Arbeiterfrauen. Heute wird man sie geriefen a Feminist. As a sickly child, Heike spent time at the illustrious Menachem Sanatorium, which supplemented the socialist education she received at home. Bulach was one of 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls, with a religiously observant mother, Ruchel, and a father, Chimaya, who was no longer a believer, but out of love for his wife, he conformed to religious traditions at home. Bulachs älterer Bruder, Berel, hat a größere Spur auf ihm. Hat ungenommen in Berels Ideologie und hat sich auch eingeschlossen in Jugendbund Zukunft. Chimaya ist gewesen ein Lederarbeiter, ein Chalupnik. Die Buchiren haben mit ihm mitgearbeitet. Berel hat verrendigt ein Handelsschuh und ist geworden ein Buchhalter. When the war broke out on September 1st, 1939, like tens of thousands of others, Berel and Bulach fled east and eventually found themselves under the Soviet occupation of eastern Poland. They had been there a short time, and the plan was that Berel would return to Warsaw and bring the rest of the family to the Soviet zone. He became involved in Bund underground activities in Warsaw and didn't return. Bulach hat nicht gewollt bleiben einer allein und ist zurück heimgegangen in der deutsch okkupierten Warschau. Bulach und Heike haben sich hereingeworfen in die bundische interirdische Aktivitäten. Heike verspreit die allgemeine bundische Presse zusammen mit den Sachaver Arnfeiners Schwägerin Miriam Schiffmann und andere. On November 15, 1940, the Warsaw Ghetto was sealed. Bulach and Heike and their families had precious little means to procure food. Soup kitchens were organized by the various political groups. Jews were allotted less than 200 calories a day. Chimaya hat gemisst verkaufen, alles was het gehad hat, es erwählt. Achitz Berels Fiedel. Early in 1941, Bulach was seized for slave labor and was sent to a camp in Galvaline known as the Inferno of Galvaline. For a 10-hour shift, he received a bowl of soup and 200 grams of bread. They were draining swamps. Their clothes never dried, and they were physically tormented by the Ukrainian guards. Bulach got very sick. After nearly 4 months in the camp, he returned to the ghetto more dead than alive. He was not allowed to join the Bund's militia because he was in such terrible physical condition, and finally collapsed, unable to get out of bed for a month. Heike ist gestanden bei seinem Bett. Berel hat vor ihm gespielt Fiedel. Und der Tat hat ihm weggegeben das letzte Stückchen Brot. Sof hat Berel gemisst verkaufen sein beliebten Fiedel, was es gewesen die letzte wertvolle Sache wie Stieb. Aber keine Sache hat es nicht geholfen. Chimaya ist ausgegangen von Hunger. In March 1942, the socialist Zionists, inspired by Antik Zuckerman, and the Jewish communists created the Jewish Anti-Fascist Bloc, an underground fighting organization. This group rapidly faded away the next month, when the Gestapo targeted over 60 underground activists from all political parties and murdered most of them on the spot. During the infamous deportation of 300,000 Warsaw Jews to the gas chambers of Treblinka, the anti-fascist bloc was resurrected in July as JOB, the Jewish Fighting Organization. The leaders of the Bund voted against joining with the reasoning that as a socialist organization, their place was with the PPS, the Polish Socialist Party. When the catastrophe of total annihilation became irrefutable, it was the decisive vote of Heinrich Rus that brought the Bund into Job in October 1942. Marek Edelman represented the Bund on the Presidium of Job and became one of the commanders of the uprising. On November 11th, 1942, Heike's 23rd birthday, among the throng of Jews herded to the Umschlagplatz to be deported to Treblinka, Heike and 6 Bundist comrades stayed together. Velvolozovsky had a file with which he sawed through the iron bars of the cattle car window. The 7 jumped from the moving train. Heike realized she had no choice but to return to the ghetto. She was the only one of the 7 who survived the Holocaust. Fighting units were being organized. Initially, women were not permitted to join the Bund fighting units. After great protest, a compromise was reached. Each unit would be made up of 5, 4 men and 1 woman. Burach was a desirable candidate. He insisted that Heike be allowed to join his group or he would not stay. His was a unit of 6. The first armed action carried out by Job was carried out by Morgn and Burach in January 1943. They freed one of their comrades, a carpenter named Zund, from the Gestapo. When Germans renewed deportations on January 18, 1943, Job fighters attacked. The resistance was quickly quelled, but the Germans worried about more resistance and halted the deportation after 4 days. By February, the fighters were getting more organized. They acquired additional weapons, though they didn't have enough bullets. And they trained. By day, they worked at forced labor. At night, they plotted. For the uprising, the ghetto was divided into 3 sectors. Burach was on guard duty the night of the 19th of April. They knew to expect something big because it was Erev Pesach and Hitler's birthday. The Nazis' plan, in fact, was to liquidate the ghetto. Burach gave the signal when he saw columns of German soldiers and their collaborators approaching the ghetto entrance. Sorry, it's a ghetto entrance. There were several. The fighting lasted over 30 days with sporadic eruptions into July. 2 fighting organizations participated, Job and ZZW, the Jewish Military Union, which was the revisionist Zionist fighting organization. People who were not members of either organization were inspired and spontaneously joined by using anything that was at hand: scissors, knives, bricks, rocks. Of the 750 original members of YIVO, approximately 75 survived the uprising. My parents were part of the first group to escape the burning ghetto through the sewers. Kajik, Simcha Rotem, who died in Israel in 2018, the last surviving member of YIVO, had arranged for a truck to pick them up and transport them to the Lomyanki woods. There they formed a partisan group named after Mordechai Ananovich. But the woods were too sparse and too close to the city, so they were soon transported to the dense Vyshkov forest. Masha Gleitman and Jakubek Puttermilch and Gabrish and Chana Frischdorf were among the partisans. Chaike had to return to Warsaw for medical reasons. Buch joined her there, and they and others lived in hiding with a heroic Polish family, the Peras, until the Polish uprising of August 1944. They heeded the Bund's call to report to fight again. Buch and Chaike left their hiding place and tried to join a Polish fighting group from the home army, the AK. The leader was dismayed to see Jewish survivors and raised his pistol to shoot them. A member of his platoon raised his own machine gun and threatened to shoot the leader and the entire platoon if he dared to touch one hair on their heads. They fled and joined a unit of the AL, the communist fighting organization. When the Germans quashed the Polish uprising with 250,000 victims, they assembled the surviving population of Poland, of Warsaw, in Pruszków to select who would go to Germany for slave labor and who would remain in the ruins of Warsaw. Those survivors who were recognized as Jews were shot on the spot. With their obvious Jewish features, Chaike and Buch could not risk this selection. They went into hiding in a bunker with other comrades. Their very close friend Vlatke came at great risk to say goodbye. "Brideke, halt sich," she said to Buch. On January 17th, 1945, Warsaw was liberated by the Red Army and the Polish left-wing army under General Berling. People I knew personally were volunteers in these armies. Though not every one of them entered Warsaw on the 17th, their heroism must be mentioned. Michal Baron, who helped liberate Majdanek, Aaron Feinel, Yasha Starker, Nachum Muscatel, Leon Schwartz, Avremel Khan, Jakob Neiman, and his brother Fischl, whom I didn't know because he was murdered by Poles in Lodz after the war. Warsaw was liberated, but Chaike and Buch and the others in the bunker didn't know. Bernhard Goldstein, the Bund Special Ops Chief, came to dig them out, dead or alive. They heard noises and dug themselves deeper in. After a week, one night, Leonia Falk, who was in the bunker with her 13-year-old son, went out to forage for food. She witnessed people singing and dancing in the streets with the Red Army soldiers and returned with the news that they were free. Buch hat nicht Stoff gerät wegen seiner Überlebenden mit mir und nicht mit meinem Bruder Chiel. Weil mein Mann ist ein Historiker und es geht bekannt mit den Brüten von dem Leben in Warschau und in Ghetto, hat Buch mit ihm gerät. Aber auf eine bescheidene Mäufen, nicht wegen seiner eigenen heldischen Auftieren. Heiket gerät in der Öffentlichkeit, aber weinig wegen sich allein. Sie hat übergegeben die Fakten, man soll sie dermannen in der Geschichte. Aber ein Fakt kennen wir nur von den Geschichtebüchern. Bei der größeren Deportation von 300.000 Warschauer Juden in die Gaskammern von Treblinka ist gewesen eine speziell schadliche Selektion, wenn die Deutschen haben gezwungen, alle verbliebenen Juden im Ghetto sich zu versammeln auf etliche Gassen, beschreienes mit dem Umschlagplatz. Dort haben die Deutschen bestimmt, wer geht gleich in die Gaskammern und wer bleibt derweil auf Sklavenarbeit im Ghetto. Die Selektion ist treurig berühmt wie der Kessel. Lebenbuchen ist gegangen eine Frau mit einer kleinen Jüngel. Jiden haben in der Engschaft sich abgeregt von ihr, weil man wird ihr sicher schicken zum Tod. Und sie haben nicht gewollt mitgeschleppt werden. Buruch hat gehabt das Kind hinter seinem Mantel und ihm ziegefestigt zu sich mit seinem Passig. Er hat gebeten, die Chawairem sollen ihm ringeln. Also ist die Frau durch mit ihr Kind zum Leben Chotsch Chaishu. Buruch always said, "No Jewish child will suffer if he can help it." That is also why a 13-year-old was in hiding with his group. Nobody else wanted the burden of a mother with a child. He grew up to be a professor at Dalhousie University, Professor Michael Falk, who died last year at the age of 91. His mother lived to 107. Immediately after liberation, Chaik and Buch were living in a bombed-out ruin with a tarp as a roof over their heads. Their friends, Chefke and Ludwig Schwedosh, also ghetto survivors, were sharing this room with them. Buch said he would not build a new life on the ruins of Polish Jewry. Chaik had had enough upheaval and uncertainty in her life and was reluctant to leave. But all four of them left and made their way to Sweden, where each couple had a son. Sweden was like paradise for them. Von Schweden haben Chaik und Buch emigriert kein Montreal, wo ich bin geboren geworden. Dort haben sie ausgelebte Jungen und wiedergebot ein jüdisch Leben. Covid, sehr lichtigen Andenk.
And now I'd like to ask Esti Zanoni to come up, share a poem with us. Esti. There you are. Esti is a 7-year-old student at the Workers' Circle. She's been studying Yiddish with her father since she was 3 years old and enjoys Yiddish children's books of all types. Hi, Esti. Did you want to stand on that? Do you want to stand on the case? Chair better? Okay. Okie dokie. Terrific.
From tomorrow on, written by 8-year-old Motla in the Warsaw Ghetto, translated by Dr. Marie Sirkin. From tomorrow on I shall be sad. From tomorrow on. Today I shall be gay. What is the use of sadness? Tell me that. Because the evil winds begin to blow. Why should I grieve today for tomorrow? Tomorrow may be so good, so sunny. Tomorrow the sun may shine for us again. Tomorrow we may no longer need to be sad. From tomorrow on I shall be sad. From tomorrow on, not today. Today I shall be glad. And every day, no matter how bitter it be, I say, from tomorrow on I shall be sad, not today. Von morgen on werde ich unbedingt sein. Von morgen, heint nein, will ich nicht. Heint will ich fröhlich sein. Und so jeden Tag will ich sagen, wie bitte soll nicht sein. Heint will ich unbedingt und so von morgen an will ich unbedingt sein. Heint nein.
And now I ask Daniela Rabbani to come up and sing for us. Daniela is a Brooklyn-based storyteller who collaborated to revive ghetto tango and whose work in film, on the Yiddish stage, and as a concert artist is inspired by her experience as a third-generation Holocaust fighter.
Meine Schwester Chaya, my sister Chaya, with the green eyes and the long brown braids. She raised me on Smutcha Street in a house with crooked steps because my mother would go to work just as the sun kissed the sky to bring home a tiny, meager pay. But Chaya would stay with the brothers, and she would keep us safe and cuddle us, sing us songs when children get tired at night. My Schwester Chaya with the green eyes and the long brown hair. She wasn't even 10 years old. She would cook for us and scratch our little keppies. The only thing she forgot to do was play. My sister Chaya with the green eyes and the brown braids, a German in Treblinka, burned her. And here I am in the Jewish state, the last person who ever knew she existed. And so it is for her that I write my songs in Yiddish, because somewhere up there, maybe she's listening. Mein Schwester Chaya mit die grüne Augen, mein Schwester Chaya mit die schwarze Zepp. Die Schwester Chaya, was hat mich der Zeugen neu, smutschig Gas in Häus mit krumme Trepp. Die Mame ist weg von Stub beginnen, wenn auf den Himmel hat kaum gehält. Sie ist weg allein in Krumm verdienen, dus biedne drobne Groschen dicke Geld. Und Chaya ist geblieben mit de Brüder, und sie hat sie gekornet und gehielt. Und sie fleck singen sie die schöne Lieder, vernacht, wenn kleine Kinder vermied. Mein Schwester Chaya mit die grüne Augen, mein Schwester Chaya mit die lange Haare. Die Schwester Chaya, was hat mich der Zeugnis noch nicht alt gewesen, kein zendlich Jahr. Sie hat geräumt gekocht, der langt das Essen. Sie hat gezwungen uns die kleine Cap. Noch spielen sich mit uns, hat sie vergessen, die Schwester Chaya mit die schwarze Zepp. Mein Schwester Chaya mit die Augen grüne, hat Deutsch hat in der Blinke sie verbrennt. Und ich bin in der jüdische Medine, der Sommerletzte, was hat sie gekannt. Für ihr schreib ich auf Jiddisch meine Lieder in Tag die schreckliche von unserer Zeit. Bei Gott allein ist ihr Bass, Jechide in Himmel sitzt sie bei seiner rechter Seite. Für ihr schreib ich auf Jiddisch meine Lieder in Tag die schreckliche von unserer Zeit. Bei Gott allein ist ihr Bass, Jechide in Himmel sitzt sie bei seiner rechter Seite.
And now I ask Lily Pasner to come up. Lily is a first-year student at Barnard and one of the Workers' Circle College Network democracy organizers. She's been an editor at J-Girls and written for Jewish Women's Archive, as well as being active in politics and social justice causes.
Vladka Britt Robertson and her twin sister Nellie Blitt Dunkel were born in Warsaw in 1931. Vladka has lived in England since 1946. The following excerpts are from her essay, Surviving in Warsaw, My Wartime Experiences. In August 1939, we were with my parents on a holiday in the Polish mountains near Zakopane. Rumors of a German invasion meant that we had to cut our holiday short and hurry home to Warsaw, where we lived in a small apartment. Within days, war broke out, and Warsaw was subjected to incendiary bomb raids. My parents decided that they had to leave Warsaw because of their known political activities. My father was a leading member of the Jewish Socialist Bund organization, and my mother was headmistress of a Yiddish primary school and active in Pol Zion. They thought that taking young children on foot to the Russian frontier, along with thousands of other fleeing people, would be too dangerous. We were therefore left with our grandparents, aunts and uncles, and cousins. When my parents were leaving, my uncle Jacob cried. I knew then that awful things were happening. Then, following the Russo-German Pact, Soviet troops invaded Poland from the east, and my parents found themselves in Russian-occupied Poland. My mother managed to smuggle herself back to Warsaw to be with us. My father, Lucian Blitt, also tried to get back to Warsaw to help with the underground operation of the Bund. But he was caught by Russians and imprisoned in a labor camp until 1942, when he was released and joined the Polish army, and eventually came to England in 1943. After my mother's return to Warsaw, we moved in with my paternal grandparents. They had a large apartment, but we all lived in one room because the winter of 1940 was very cold and fuel was in short supply. As soon as the Germans occupied Warsaw, they began issuing anti-Jewish laws. I remember being chased by gangs of Polish hooligans organized by the Germans. A high brick wall topped with barbed wire was constructed around a quarter of Warsaw, which became the ghetto. We had to move there. My mother's family, my grandparents, aunts and uncles, and 2 cousins already lived in that part of Warsaw, and we moved in with them. My father's parents found a room in another part of the ghetto. Conditions in the ghetto were appalling. Random shootings, beatings, hostage-taking, typhus, overcrowding, homelessness, people dead from hunger in the streets. Hungry children used to snatch parcels from passers-by and immediately stuff the contents into their mouths, hoping that it was food. But there were also secret self-help committees, secret schools, secret libraries, synagogues, and clandestine political organizations. My mother was in charge of one of the few soup kitchens for starving children. There, I saw many of my school friends, swollen from hunger. My sister and I and our cousins spent most days playing with other children in our courtyard. Then, posters appeared in the ghetto announcing the evacuation of everyone to work camps somewhere in the east, with only those who were working for the Germans being exempted. We soon knew that these were in reality extermination camps. People were obviously terrified. My family built a bunker in the cellar with a hidden entry, and we used to run there and hide when the raids began. We could hear the Germans and Ukrainians shouting for everyone to assemble in the courtyard or to be shot. My mother, at first, had exemption papers from the Jewish Council because of her work. But as we watched our neighbors being taken away, some quietly, some struggling, we understood that these bits of paper would not save us for long. Because of my parents' connection with the Jewish underground organization ZOB, through Pol Zion and the Bund, Michal Klepfisz, who was a Bundist courier on the Aryan side, outside the ghetto, found a Polish Catholic family who, for payment, agreed to shelter my sister and myself in their home at a great risk to themselves. At night, we were smuggled out of the ghetto, climbing a ladder over the ghetto wall. The policemen and Ukrainian soldiers were bribed. Other people were smuggling food and arms at the same time. We were dressed in double clothes and told that we now had new documents and new names and were never to mention anyone who we really were. The decision that we should leave the ghetto was taken so quickly that I cannot remember saying goodbye properly to my family. The Polish family Dubiel were kind to us and very devoted to Michal Klepfisz, whom they knew before the war. From the window of our apartment, we could see over the ghetto wall, and often our mother would come in the evenings and walk discreetly on the other side of the wall. For a short time, Michal Klepfisz shared the same apartment and talked to us about his smuggling of arms into the ghetto and making incendiary bottles for the Jewish underground. 5 weeks after we escaped, during the Passover and Easter holidays of 1943, German and Ukrainian troops surrounded the ghetto and entered supported by tanks. They started systematically setting fire to buildings with petrol and flares. I saw people shot while trying to escape with their clothes burning. Everyone outside the ghetto knew of the armed Jewish resistance, which was maintained for 4 weeks. Michal Klepfisz fought in the ghetto and died there. The Dubiels became afraid to keep 2 Jewish-looking children, and I was taken by Vlatka Mead, another Bundist courier, to a railwayman's family outside of Warsaw. When that did not work out, because of the hostility of their daughter, I went to Warsaw to a caretaker's family called Serafin. I was excited when the Polish Warsaw Uprising began in September 1944, but knew that it was still very dangerous to be recognized as a Jew. The Germans were obviously on the run now, and we could hear the Russian artillery getting nearer. However, the uprising was put down after heavy bombing, and the Germans evacuated Warsaw of all its remaining inhabitants. The Serafins and I were put on a train, but managed to jump off when it slowed down and went to a village where they had distant relatives. There, we were sheltered by very poor and hungry peasants who lived without electricity or running water. By chance, Vlatka, who had also escaped from Warsaw, met the Serafins in the small market town near my village. She could not offer money because the contact with the underground was now broken. I hoped that she would come and collect me when the war ended. When the Russian soldiers finally arrived, I thought I was the only Jew left in Poland apart from Vlatka. For some weeks, no one came, and I felt completely helpless. The Serafin family and I eventually set out that winter to walk back to the ruins of Warsaw. My only footwear was a pair of torn sandals. We found a habitable room, but without proper shoes, I could not go out. At the same time, my sister Nellie came back to Warsaw from another village. So I was reunited with my sister, and later, miraculously, with my 2 young cousins. I did not know that they had escaped from the ghetto through the sewers just a few days before the liquidation of the ghetto. In 1946, aged 14, my sister and I came to London to join our father. It felt strange to meet him again after those terrible 6 years. Strangely, we hardly talked about what happened. The rest of my family, whom we left behind in the ghetto, were all murdered.
The words for our 2 closing songs appear in transliteration on the back of your program. I'd like you to please stand as our singers come up to lead us in singing the Partisan Hymn and the Bundische Schwur. Who's going to do a count-off?
Sag nicht keinmal, als du gehst den letzten Weg. Verschimm den Bein, verstellen, wo ihr Tag. Komm im Bett noch unser ausgedenkte Show. Svett abbeut von unser Trott, wir seinen da. Von grünem Palmenland bis weißem Land von Schnee. Wir seinen da mit unserer Pein, mit unser Wein. Und wo gefallen ist der Spitz von unser Blut. Schwarzen wird doch unser Gwore, unser Mut. Es wird die Morgensonne begilden uns dem Heind. Und der Nächten wird verschwinden mit dem Heind. Nur euch versammeln wird die Sonne in dem Kajor. Wie a Parol soll gehen das Lied von dort zu dort. Geschrieben ist das Lied mit Blut und nicht mit Blei. Es ist nicht kein Liedl von a Feigl läuft er frei. Das hat der Volk zwischen Ball und dick gewähnt. Das Lied gesungen mit Naganes in die Hand. To sag nicht keinmal, als du gehst dem letzten Weg. Verschimmeln Bleien, verstellen neue Tag. Komm im Bett noch unser ausgebänkte Show. Es wird erbeugt an unser Trott, wir seinen da. Komm im Bett noch unser ausgebänkte Show. Es wird erbeugt an unser Trott, wir seinen da. Schwester von Arbeit und Neut, alle, was seinen zu seht und zu spreit, zusammen, zusammen, die von ist greit. Sie flattert von Sorgen, von Blut ist sie reut. A Schwur, auf Leben und Heut. Himmel und Erd, Welt und Seufern, Eides wird sein, die lichtige Stern, a Schwur von Blut, a Schwur und Grenzen zum Bund. Noch wird nicht schlafen, befreien sind. Die von die heute ist heuchen Gleit. Sie flattert von Sorgen, von Blut ist sie reut. A Schwur auf Leben und Teut. Himmel und Erd, Welt und Zeus Herren, das wird sein, die lichtige Stern, a Schwur von Blut und a Schwur von Tränen, wir schweren, wir schweren, wir schweren.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I'd like to let you know there are some free materials in front here on this trunk. A book we published 5 years ago on the event of our 75th anniversary of our gathering. And on behalf of the organizing committee, Shane Baker, Tsvaygl Jacobs, myself, Marcel Kshensky, and Moshe Rosenfeld, I'd like to thank all of our participants for creating today's event. And please join us after we open the gate and lay a few flowers on Der Stein. Thank you all. Get home safe.